for Wednesday, January 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2021. Glad you could join us tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to answer your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, our tradition, scripture, the popes, the councils, the fathers, the medievals, the doctors, the saints, and all the holy people of the Catholic Church. And hopefully I'll answer your question to satisfy you so that you walk away knowing that your question has been answered. As you know, this program is set aside on Tuesdays and Wednesdays every week from 8 o'clock p.m. to 9:30 p.m. And sometimes we go over. Last night, for example, we went, I think, till 10:30. And I still didn't get all the questions answered. I think I got about 2/3 of the way down the list, and we're going to try again. As a matter of fact, I forgot to bring up the questions that I didn't answer from yesterday, and I'll see if I have time to do that later. Okay, and also, as you know, we cover at least one topic at the top of the show, something in current news. And yesterday we covered, for example, the issue of the CDF of the Catholic Church saying that they could not bless homosexual civil unions. Thank God for that. We went through all that and pointed out the somewhat dichotomous view they have in welcoming and blessing, quote unquote, homosexuals into the church, and yet drawing the line in the sand, so to speak, when they said that they could not be married or have a civil union. So somewhat of a mixed bag there, but you know, that's the best we can get today, and we'll deal with what we've got. Someone also raised the issue about the Vatican. I have here the news item, who gave $1 million to the making of Elton John's Rocket Man. Yeah, I hadn't heard that before. It's amazing what the news brings out sometimes. And here we are. That, you know, honestly, it does not surprise me that the Vatican invested in Rocket Man. You know, we talked yesterday about how many, what's the percentage of gay priests and bishops in, you know, throughout the world. And the Vatican, I think, is like 50% from the last statistics I heard. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And it shouldn't surprise you. This is the state of affairs. And if you didn't know it, well, now you do. And it's time to wake up to the sad story in the Catholic Church about what's going on. So yeah, $1.2 million was the actual number. I was intrigued enough about that to look it up, and I got that from 4 different sources, so it's pretty legit. At any rate, there you go. Life in the big city, as they put it. All right. Also, I would like to advertise again the new college that has just come about in the city of Hagerstown, Maryland. And that is the Collegium Sanctorum Angelorum, otherwise known as the Collegium. And that is a college campus that can take students from anywhere in the world to reside there and give you a good Catholic education. And we've advertised this before, but I'm going to do this every week if I remember. The Collegium is, let me read the paragraph they have. The Collegium's curriculum is foundational to our mission to impart the knowledge of God, that he might be loved and served in this world. We have a set integrated curriculum of theology, philosophy, history, English, literature, logic, rhetoric, Latin, math, science, music, and art. What more could you ask for? Everything you want in a liberal arts education right there. The liberal arts in the Catholic sense of the word. And here is the kicker. All of that tuition, room, board for guess what? 40,000. No. 30,000? No. 20,000? No. Here's the actual figure, $16,800 per year. I know some high schools that charge that much per year. Probably more than that. And here you have a college, accredited college, and everybody, all the faculty takes the oath against modernism. If you remember what that is, from Pius X. And this is in the city that's a stone's throw from where I live in Pennsylvania, because I'm right on the border between us and Maryland, in Hagerstown, Maryland. And Hagerstown is up and coming city. They are, let me see, due west of Baltimore, about 70 miles. Due west of Frederick, Maryland, which is the next biggest city, about 35 miles. So Frederick is like right between Hagerstown and Baltimore. And I don't know if you've ever been out to Maryland before, but we have everything here, good and bad. But we have the city and we have the country. And Hagerstown is about right smack in the middle of both of them. So a good, and you're what? Let me see. You are about in Hagerstown. You are about an hour and a quarter from Washington, D.C., from the heart of Washington, D.C., on a good traffic day, let's say. Okay, about an hour and a quarter. You're about an hour and a quarter from Baltimore. And you are about, let me see, you are about an hour and a quarter from Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania. And you are probably about 3 hours, 3.5 maybe from Philadelphia, and maybe about another 2 hours to New York. So what, about 5.5 hours from New York, 5 hours, all by car. And we have trains here, we have planes, we have everything. Boats, whatever way you want to travel, we have it. We even have motorcycles and what else? Bicycles. We have everything here. So it's easy to get around town and quite an experience. So let me push that again for you. If you're looking for a nice, inexpensive, traditional Catholic college, this is the place. And you're probably saying, well, give us the contact information. Okay, here we go. www.the-collegium.org. Let me say that again, www.the-collegium.org. There you go. And talk to my man, Ed Schaefer. He will be glad to help you, and tell him I sent you. Most important. He even may give you a discount on your tuition if you tell him I sent you. Okay? So there you go. All right. And today I want to cover marriage, divorce, and remarriage in the Catholic Church. And what is the big deal between the Catholics and the Protestants? Here it is. As you know, if you're a Catholic and you get divorced, you cannot get remarried. Okay? Yep, that's what you sign on to when you become a Catholic. If you get divorced, you cannot get remarried under any circumstances. Okay? Under any circumstances. The only way you can get another marriage, and technically speaking, it's not called another marriage. Okay? Because you have to get the first marriage annulled. And if it's annulled, that means it wasn't a marriage. to begin with, which is the whole reason why you can get it annulled. Okay. So you are not getting remarried in the Catholic Church. You are getting married. And you could technically say for the first time, because an annulment means your first marriage was not a real marriage, and so therefore you weren't married. Okay. Canonically, that's the way it works out. Okay. Now, if you were to get married after you got a divorce and you were Catholic and you were to get married, what would be your state, your spiritual state? Well, you'd be living in adultery. Okay. And we get this from what Jesus taught about marriage and divorce. Okay. He said, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Okay. And of course, people will begin to ask, well, what about that exception clause where he says, except for fornication? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. And that's probably going to be one of our most important pieces of information to pivot off of, but we have to build a case first. But I just want to say that first off, if you're a Catholic, you can't get married twice, can't get remarried. And unless you have an annulment, and that applies to everybody. Now, of course, the issue comes up and people say, well, yeah, you can't get divorced and remarried in the Catholic Church. But in the Catholic Church, come on, let's be honest. A divorce is just like an annulment, or vice versa. There's so many annulments given today. It's just like getting a divorce in the Protestant Church. Okay. Now, I don't know about the frequency. I don't think there are as many annulments as there are divorces in the Protestant churches. But let's just say this: there are a lot more annulments given out today than there were, say, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when you could the amount of annulments given out were in the triple digits. That means less than 1,000 per year. Okay, now they're in the 5 digits, and we're working on 6. So last count, I think 1980s was 50,000 annulments, compared to like 500 annulments 30 years prior to that in the 1950s. So you can see it has jumped quite a bit. One reason for that, if we're going to put some legitimacy on it and not just say that the ball has started to roll down the hill, or the snowball started to roll down the avalanche and it can't be stopped. One way to defend the church's higher frequency of annulments is to say that today, with all the cultural changes that we've had, sexual, the role of husband and wife, the wife now wants to go out into the workforce, and she wants to be just like a man and make the money, and then hire the nanny to take care of her kids if she has any. And so the whole thing is basically reversed from what it was before. Okay. So in the 20th century, from say 1900 to 1950, the woman's role was in the home, and rarely was she out in the workforce, only if she had to be. And now, in the latter part of the 20th century, from the 1960s onward, it has increasingly become that the woman is out of the house into the workforce. The children are basically taken care of by strangers, and we have all kinds of juvenile delinquency, and we have sexual perversions that we haven't had before, or at least not to the extent that we have now. And so all the roles are confused. All the people, they don't even know what marriage is anymore, compared to what marriage was in the first part of the 20th century. So for that reason and many more, The church felt that the understanding of what marriage is has been so diluted that it calls for more annulments, that these aren't given out willy-nilly, although some are. Okay, let's be honest about this. If you have enough prestige, money, position in the parish, you can bet your bottom dollar you're going to have an easier time getting an annulment, unfortunately, than someone else. Okay, and that's just the nature of life. You're going to have a certain percentage that is always dependent on that negative part of life. But speaking more positively, as I said, these annulments, the frequency of them is given because of the poor understanding of what marriage is today in our society. I mean, you watch the Hollywood, we know what happens today instantaneously because whatever happens appears on our internet screen. And so we know the innermost secrets of anybody in politics, Hollywood, finance, technology, science, whatever it is. We know what happens to people before sometimes they know it themselves. And we see that their marriages fall apart left and right, up and down, all day long. And we see this, it bombards us, and it cheapens marriage. And that's the kind of education that a lot of us have. We get it from the internet screen instead of from our pastor, who's supposed to be teaching us these things, or whatever studies they get together, and it's not being done. We have a lot of our clerics into alternate lifestyles. Of course, the last thing they're going to be teaching is on the solidity of marriage if they're living in that kind of lifestyle. So the church isn't doing her job. And then to fill that vacuum, we're getting from the society divorces that are, you laugh at them. You hear a Hollywood couple get together, and the first thing you think of is, gee, how long is it going to be till they get a divorce? And it's almost like clockwork. Give it a couple years, 3, 4, and they're divorcing and finding somebody else. It's absolutely amazing to watch. These things that happen on the internet, these are our teachers. This is what Generation X and Y and Z are growing up in. That's how they look at marriage. Okay, so the things are totally reversed. The kids are getting their education from the world and not the church, unfortunately. And with that comes a whole perverted idea of what marriage is. It's not a commitment anymore. Okay, it's just, I make you feel good, you make me feel good for as long as that lasts. And when it doesn't last, then we'll part and find somebody else to fill that gap. And the heck with the kids, they're just going to have to suck it up and, go with the next family. And we have no idea what damage we're causing psychologically with them. I don't think I've ever met a kid that's from a divorced home that's psychologically stable. Very, very few. So this kind of world we live in. Okay. So that may be the reason. So getting back to our rule here, the only way you can get marry someone else in the Catholic Church is if you get an annulment. And believe me, you're going to have to go through a lot of rings, jump through a lot of hoops in order to get an annulment. It's just not like saying, I want an annulment. What they're going to have to do is check the background of both spouses all the way back to the time they were married. And before that, there may be some psychological things that occurred that they need to know about that did not induce two people that were ready to get married when they got married. and they will interview your former friends and relatives, and until they get enough witnesses where they can make an assessment on your character, your personality, your disposition when you got married, and all those things are going to be taken into account on both sides. So it can be a very long, drawn out process, and it can last if it's done correctly. Okay, yeah, you can whiz bang these things through if you want, but if you're going to be responsible and do your job correctly, it might take up to a year to get this thing adjudicated. Okay, so it's not as easy as cutting a piece of cake, that's for sure. So that's if you're a Catholic. Now, if you're a Protestant and you get divorced, if your divorce is for fornication, now fornication is some kind of perversion of sexual activity. Okay, it could be anything from, it comes from the Greek word porneia, which is a very general word, and it can refer to any kind of self-induced sexual arousal, or adultery to the other extreme, wherein you have sexual intercourse with another person outside of your marriage, or it could be pornography related, or it could be pedophilia, it could be homosexuality, it could, all kinds of things fall under that umbrella of porneia, or what they call fornication. But usually it refers to the act by which one of the spouses has sexual intimacy with someone other than their spouse. And we're talking serious sexual intimacy. We're not just talking about a kiss on the forehead. We're talking about serious, prolonged intimacy, and the other spouse finds out about it, and they have the right to separate, or let's say divorce, from the spouse who's guilty. And if that is the case in the Protestant churches, well, the way they interpret what Jesus says is that in cases of fornication, it's okay for the innocent party to remarry someone else. And that's because they believe that if the marriage was separated because of divorce, then that allows the innocent party to remarry. If the divorce was caused for any other reason except for being unequally yoked, that is, being married to a non-Christian, called the Peter principle, or the Pauline principle, sorry. The Peter principle is something totally different. It has to do with economics. The Pauline principle is what they would use there, and just as the Catholics would. But their view is if the divorce is occurring because of, irreconcilable differences, well, any Protestant pastor worth his salt is not going to allow you to, first of all, he's going to frown against even divorcing for so-called irreconcilable differences. And if he's going to be true to his Protestant upbringing, he's not going to allow you to remarry. Of course, you can go down the street and find another Protestant church in which they will allow you to remarry, okay? Because they interpret the Bible differently than Protestant Church A, okay? And if Protestant Church B doesn't give it to you, well, of course, you can go down the street and go to Protestant Church C, take your chances there. Eventually, you'll end up with a church that will allow you, if you look hard enough and long enough, where you'll be allowed to remarry. So you see quite a difference there. And as I said last night, if what the Catholic Church is teaching is true, and I hold it to be true, and I've done tremendous study on this, and it's all written up in my Matthew commentary. As a matter of fact, I've been studying this issue off and on, and sometimes intensely, for the past 40 years. Okay. So I'm quite confident of the Catholic position. It is a dogma of the Catholic Church, and therefore it will never change. Okay. And that means we hold it as true, ipso facto. No questions. Now that's one thing. The other thing is, can we support it from the Bible and get to that position from Scripture and tradition? And we can. Okay. So being a Catholic, let me just say this, being a Catholic, you have the advantage of the fact that the church lays down the dogma for you to believe, whether it's marriage and divorce, or sin and going to confession, or becoming a priest, or whatever it is, whatever dogma it is. You have the privilege of the fact that you don't have to sit down there and reinvent the wheel. You take what the church has taught and you accept it as the truth. You don't have to do any work. The church gives it to you. She spoon feeds you the doctrine that you are to believe. She's worked it all out ahead of time. Okay, for 2,000 years. The product that you have of that is all the dogmas that are present in the Catholic Church today. And believe me, she worked hard at it. So you have it. But a lot of Catholics grow up with that kind of being spoon-fed by the church, but they have no idea, no concept of how the church got to those doctrines. They just accept them, which is good. It's all good, but they just don't know. So if you ask the typical Catholic, can you support the Catholic view of divorce and marriage and remarriage from the Bible? I know probably 2 Catholic scholars that could support it from the Bible. Tradition's a little easier because you just look up this father, what he said, and you look up that father, and then you shake them all together, and you come out with the consensus of the fathers. Okay, that's easy to do. Interpreting Scripture, exegeting it to get to the point where you see this big difference between the Catholics and the Protestants, well, that's another story altogether. Okay, because Scripture's much harder to interpret than the typical fathers or medievals of the Catholic Church. Okay, and as I said, I don't know very many Catholics, and I'm talking about Catholic scholars now. They can rattle off what the dogmas are, but exegeting Scripture to get there, and that's where the basic source of the Catholic teaching comes from. It comes from Scripture. Okay. I don't know too many. And this is after 40 years of dealing with this subject. Okay. So if we're going to have an apologetic for the typical Protestant out there, we better know what we're talking about with this marriage and divorce thing, because look, this is how serious it is. What we are saying to the Protestant is this. We are saying, if you were divorced for fornication, let's say your wife committed fornication, we're talking to the woman. You divorced your husband because he fornicated with another woman, and you got remarried. Well, according to the way we see the Bible, you're living in adultery. Yeah, you thought you were scot-free to go remarry. You weren't. And therefore, your remarriage has ended up in adultery. Okay. So, wow. Do you know how many divorces there are out there in Protestant church today and remarriages? Quite a few. Millions. Every year. Okay. So, wow. Pretty big, huh? Pretty big. We got to know what this thing is talking about, how you get there. And so let's go back. I'm going to take you on a little tour of the Bible here. And one of the first passages we have to deal with is Deuteronomy 24. And the reason for that is that when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, and I'm going to stick with Matthew because he's got the most teaching on this subject. Mark and Luke follow along, and Luke is important because he also talks to Gentiles. But Matthew is most important here. He has two passages that talk about marriage and divorce and remarriage. Matthew 5, 31 and 32, and Matthew 19, verses 1 to 9. And in one of those passages, Matthew 19, the topic of the Mosaic law comes up because the Pharisees approached Jesus trying to trap him. And they ask him about, divorce. Is it okay for a man to divorce his wife for any cause? Now, that's the key phrase here, any cause. Because they're referring, when they use that phrase, they're getting it from Deuteronomy 24. So they think. Okay. This is going to be the key to the whole issue. So they think. And Jesus says, have you not heard? God made the male and female. The two shall become one flesh, and what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. And of course, the typical Pharisee is testing Jesus, is going to come and say, well, come on, Jesus. Why did Moses give a divorce law then? And they're pointing to Deuteronomy 24. And Jesus says, he just comes back and bulldozes them. They're expecting some kind of quid pro quo, tit for tat exchange with Jesus, like they did in John chapter 5 and 6, 7, and 8, where they went on and on challenging Jesus, and he got him at every corner. But it was a very long and involved conversation. Here they think they're probably going to do the same thing. Jesus cuts them off at the pass and says, because of the hardness of your hearts, that law was given. But from the beginning, it was not so. What God has joined together, let man put asunder. That was God's intention from the beginning. And the only reason you had a divorce law given to you by Moses was because you were so sinful that neither Moses nor God knew what to do with you, and said, let them have their divorce, because they're going to commit worse crimes if we don't give them divorce. Yeah, they may murder their wives, or, gently push them off the cliff and say it was an accident. Something along those lines. Who knows what they would conjure up in their mind? Okay. Once you get the idea you don't love your wife and you want to get rid of her for somebody else, oh man, all kinds of machinations are going to occur in your perverted mind to solve that problem. But that's the way Jesus hit them. Because of your sinful hearts. You were sinful from the time you came out of Egypt, and you haven't stopped yet. And you haven't even entered into the promised land yet. And it's like, do I really want to do this? God is saying to himself. That's what, basically he said to Moses in Exodus 32. Step aside, I'm going to destroy all of them. And Moses stepped in and pleaded with God. And God changed his mind. But even then, only 2 of the people that came out of Egypt entered the promised land from Egypt, Joshua and Caleb, and all those that were under 20 years old. So, wow. Jesus hit them right between the eyes. Okay. So let's look at this. Even though Jesus argued this way, let's go back and look at Deuteronomy 24, and you'll see why. But the Catholic teaching comes from what Jesus says in Matthew 19, verse 8 and 9, that the divorce law was never meant to be. And if you are divorcing, it's not because you have an excuse to end your marriage. It's because you're living in sin. Okay. And your quest to be remarried is a product of that. And that was never meant to be by God at all. Okay. So that's where the Catholic doctrine is coming in. It lays its foundation and says, God joined it together. No man can put it asunder. Okay. And that means, a judge or a wayward priest or whoever, says, okay, you've got a divorce. That does not make asunder your marriage. Okay. You may get a civil separation, a civil divorce. Those men have no power over the law of God that once you are married for life until your spouse dies. That's the way the church looks at it. Okay. So in that sense, the divorce, you could call it divorce, separation, cutting away, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't make any difference. Okay. Even if it has legal status with the society. With God, it has no status. Okay. Which means, let's say this. If your spouse commits fornication, you do have the right to divorce. Okay. But you don't have the right to remarry. Why? Well, because when Jesus says in Matthew 19:9, whosoever divorces his wife except for fornication and marries another commits adultery. Okay. The Catholic Church is saying that the exception clause only applies to the divorce. So in other words, if you divorce your spouse for fornication, that's allowable. And where did that law come from? Where was it that you were allowed to divorce for fornication? Well, it didn't come from Deuteronomy 24. You see, and that's where it gets confusing for a lot of people. Because they think that the Pharisees refer back to Moses and said Moses allowed divorce. Well, wasn't that for fornication? Nope. Wasn't for fornication. And here's where it gets kind of comical. Because in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1, Moses says, when you divorce your wife, you give her a bill of divorcement. You send her out of your house. And the cause can be for, now remember I said there was this issue about any cause. The Pharisees approached Jesus and they said, can a man divorce his wife for any cause? And they're getting that from Deuteronomy 24 because the word that's used there in the Hebrew, and I have to use the Hebrew here, because you're going to find all kinds of different translations in your English Bibles. It says, if a man divorces his wife for something indecent or something unclean, or, there's like 12 different variations to this interpretation of this one Hebrew phrase. And nobody's hit it. The closest one probably is something indecent. But the real word, the real phrase behind this word in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 is ervat davar. Ervat davar. Okay. Now, ervat with davar is in what they call a construct form. So it's one concept with two words. And one word is the controlling word. The other word follows suit, so to speak. So you have one superior word, one inferior word. And in this particular phrase, ervat davar, ervat normally means nakedness. Okay, when you look that up in the Hebrew. And davar is like, it can be a matter, a thing, and something vague, the matter of this or the thing of that, or, so it's a very general word. Okay. But the way that it's said in Hebrew is nakedness of a thing. Nakedness of a thing. So what the heck is that? nakedness of a thing, because in the construct form, that's the way you have to say it. Nakedness of a thing. Now, if the words were reversed, okay, if we had davar ervat, it would be a thing of nakedness. Okay. And you know from that kind of phrase that, yeah, well, that probably most likely refers to fornication, because that's a thing or a matter of nakedness where two people get together and they're naked and they fornicate. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So if Moses had come down and said to the people, when you divorce for a davar or ervat, here's what you have to do. You have to give her a bill of divorcement, send her out of your house, blah, blah, blah. Gave them all the rules. Okay. And people would say, oh, well, that makes sense. A davar or ervat is a matter of nakedness. So, yeah, I mean, Leviticus 18 and 20 talks about nakedness, and it says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your uncle. That's the nakedness of your aunt. And he goes through like 20 different scenarios there, and we all understand what that means. So that's not hard. Okay. And you would figure, yeah, if divorce was legit, if divorce was something that God was giving the people as a blessing and wanted to promote the society and be the charm of Israel that all the nations would look at and say, yeah, look at their divorce law. You know, they can divorce, you know, when it's really necessary and all this. And wow, look at all those good laws they have. Let's follow them. That he would say, yeah, you can divorce for a davar or ervat, a matter of nakedness. But instead of doing that, God changed the words. He reversed the words. Instead of davar or ervat, it became ervat davar, where one word is controlling the other, and that essentially means nakedness of a matter or nakedness of a thing. And who can make sense out of that? What's nakedness of a thing? What's the thing? What thing are you talking about? What matter? And how can a matter or a thing be naked? Okay. So when you totally reverse those words in Hebrew, you get a totally different meaning. Okay. You get an ervat davar. And the only other place where ervat davar is used in the Old Testament Hebrew is Deuteronomy 23, the previous chapter, and verse 14. The only other time. So if you're into etymology of Hebrew phrases and you want to find out where this peculiar phrase is used again so that you can get a model for possible definition of it, you have one place you can go. Deuteronomy 23:14. And there it says that the Lord your God walks through the camp of Israel. And since he does not want to see an ervat davar as he walks through. And you know what he's talking about? He's talking about some defecation, some crap that an Israelite laid in the middle of the camp that God walks through and sees this crap and is disgusted. And so he lays down this law. I'm walking through the camp, so I don't want to see any defecation in the camp, you know, as if they were like dogs who do it anywhere they want. And the rule in the other part of the chapter is if you need to defecate, you go outside the camp, you dig your hole and you do your duty, and then you cover it up. Okay. But the crux of the issue is that God is calling a defecation in the camp an ervat davar, the same phrase that's used in the next chapter for why a man can divorce his wife. Now, let's put this in colloquial language. Basically, you know what God is saying to the Israelites? Yeah. He's saying, you can divorce your wife for any crap you want. That's what he's saying. Okay. He does not define the word. The word's only used one other time, and it refers to crap. And so that's the essence of Deuteronomy 24:1. You can divorce your wife for any crap you want. Okay. And so they're all scratching their heads. Well, what does that mean? You know, ervat davar. Well, they all knew it was used in the previous chapter. Okay. That God had said this in the law. Okay. That didn't hit them as much. And so what happened was, instead of really understanding why God said it that way, you know, because he was disgusted with them and he was giving it to them for their sin, it's like saying, go ahead, you can divorce your wife for any crap you want. I've had enough of you. Okay. And because, you know, they're clamoring in Moses' ear. We want a divorce. We want a divorce. We want a divorce. Go ahead. You want a divorce? You can go divorce for any reason you want. Any crap you want. You can make it up if you want. Okay. There you go. And now we'll see what that does to your society. Okay. Because once you allow the society to divorce, oh boy, are you in for it? Okay. And so basically, you have a word here, an undefined word that's closest definition is crap. And they're scratching their heads. Well, how are we going to regulate this? What are we going to do? And in the camp, there's some good people. There's some conservatives. There's a lot of liberals, but there's some conservatives, just like we have today. And the liberals are saying, oh, well, there's an ambiguity here, so that must mean any reason. We can divorce our wife for any reason, any cause. And isn't that exactly what the Pharisees said to Jesus in Matthew 19:9? Jesus, is it okay to divorce your wife for any cause? Because that's what they were practicing. And they wanted to see if he was going to go against the Mosaic law. Because the way they interpreted the Mosaic law, Moses allowed divorce for any cause. Because he used ervat davar. Nakedness of a thing, literally, whatever that means. Okay. So now there was another school, the Hillel school, as opposed to the Shammai school of rabbis. The Hillel school said, no, it must mean just fornication. And they could refer to, let's say, Jeremiah 3, verse 8, where God divorces Israel for her adultery. Now, adultery is not the same thing as fornication, but fornication in a spouse is the same thing as adultery, or it leads to adultery. Okay, so when God's saying to Israel, I'm going to divorce you for adultery, and that's a specific Hebrew word, we know that fornication's involved. Okay, so the Hillel school could refer to that and say, well, if there's any ambiguity in the phrase ervat davar from Deuteronomy 24:1, we can use Jeremiah 3, verse 8, or we can use Isaiah 50, verse 1, where God divorces Israel for her adulteries. And so we get this imagery, of course, but that's all written after Deuteronomy. Okay, what are they going to do in the time? Okay, so you can see the division this is going to cause. So some people believe that the ervat davar of Deuteronomy 24:1 referred just to fornication, but it doesn't. That's the whole crux of the issue. Is it doesn't refer to fornication. If it did refer to fornication, then it would be superfluous, because men were already allowed to divorce for fornication. That's natural law, you see. That if your wife commits fornication with some other person, you separate from her. Okay. And unless, of course, she repents of what she did and she wants to restore the marriage, well, you have that opportunity also. And the proper thing to do would be to forgive her, unless there's some kind of contingencies here. And you can't, for some logistical reasons or whatever. But you do have the right to separate from. That's always been true. That was true from the time of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and his family. Everybody could separate from their fornicating spouse and not live with them any longer. Okay. So, but that wasn't the teaching in Deuteronomy 24:1. You see, if that was the case, then if they were allowed to remarry after their spouse committed divorce or committed fornication, then they wouldn't have to clamor to Moses and ask him for divorce. You see, because if they could already remarry after their spouse committed fornication, then we wouldn't have to go to Moses. Okay. And of course, the other possibility is they wanted to divorce for more than fornication and remarry for more than fornication. And that seems to be the real issue, is that they wanted basically to have a free license to divorce and not remain faithful to their wife because they saw some floozy down the street that they wanted to hook up with. And yeah, but this, my wife here, who, looks like death warmed over, is not pleasing to me anymore. And she can't cook and, this does this and does that. And they'll think of any excuse they can to make it look bad for her. And of course, at that day, the men, they were not like today in the women's liberation movement. Women were not socially, let's say, didn't have a lot of social prerogatives back in the days of Moses. Okay, the woman couldn't even divorce her husband. There was no law that a woman could divorce her husband. Okay, and that's why Luke, when he gives his rendition of marriage and divorce, he has to talk about the man first and then the woman, because now we're in Greek society where a woman was allowed to divorce her husband. So Luke has to cover that. Matthew does not cover that because he's speaking mainly to Jews. So at any rate, you see this problem that we have, okay, where Deuteronomy says, yeah, go ahead, you can divorce for any crap you want. That was never God's law. You're just getting that because you're sinful people and we don't know what else to do with you, basically. Okay. So now when Jesus comes on the scene, he sets the record straight. Look, we're going back to the way it was. Forget this Mosaic divorce law. That's in your Mosaic covenant for you Jews. Now we have the new covenant, and in that covenant, we're going to go back to the way it was before. What God joins together, let not man put asunder. And if you do put it asunder and you get remarried, you've committed adultery. Okay? And the exception clause that appears in Matthew, both chapter 5 and chapter 19, is for what it was before. It's nothing new. The exception clause was put there by Jesus because it's part of natural law. It was always been the case that a man could divorce his wife if she fornicated. Okay, so it's no big deal. And the same thing for Matthew chapter 5, verse 32. Whosoever divorces his wife except for fornication causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries her commits adultery. Now here you have a different twist on it, because it says whoever divorces his wife except for fornication causes her to commit adultery. Okay. So in other words, if you divorce your wife and she is forced to go out and marry another person for support, well, you've caused her to commit adultery. You are the stumbling block. Because if you hadn't divorced her, she would not have been tempted to go out and get married to another person for support. And in those days, that's where the woman's money came from her husband. Okay, it's not like today. So you're forcing her to go out and find support, and she's going to find the first guy she can find, Okay. And basically, because your marriage was not dissolved, then she's still married to you. And then if she gets married to somebody else because you've divorced her, well, she's committed adultery and you've caused it. And on top of that, he says, and the person who marries her commits adultery. So now you're responsible for committing two adulteries. Okay. You divorced your wife and she commits adultery by marrying somebody else, and that person she marries commits adultery. So, boy, you got everybody into a fix. Okay. Now, you could look at the exception clause there in another way and say, if he divorces his wife except for fornication, causes her to commit adultery, well, if she's the one who's committed fornication, then she's the one who's committed adultery. And you haven't caused her to do it. She's caused herself to do it. Okay. And then the man she marries is also going to commit adultery because she's not free to marry, you see. So the exception clause, in other words, can't be used as an excuse to get remarried. The exception clause is only there because any spouse has the right to separate from another spouse who's committed fornication. That's why it's there. Okay. Now, curiously, we don't see it in Mark, and we don't see it in Luke. We don't see it in Romans 7. We don't see it in 1 Corinthians 7. But 1 Corinthians 7, and I don't have time to get into it tonight because I spent an hour on this, is right next to what Jesus taught. Everything agrees. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 10, 11, and 12, 13, and 14 agrees exactly with what Jesus said that I just covered. Okay. Now, if you want to know any more details of that, I have this in a commentary of mine, the Gospel of Matthew. Okay. So get that. You can get that in an abridged version or the regular version. And that will be available at robertsongenis.org for a small fee, of course. All right. So let me go up to the top here and see if I can answer these questions for tonight. Dr. Sungenis, can a Catholic woman be married outside the Catholic Church through the civil courts, divorce her husband, and still be free to marry within the Catholic Church? Well, each of these are examined on a case-by-case basis with the tribunal that she is going to have to go in front of and give evidence of. They will make the decisions on a case-by-case basis because there's a lot of contingencies. There's a lot of factors that will impinge on how they look at the first marriage or the second marriage. There's some people that have been married 5 times, and they've got to go through each one of them and adjudicate each one of them and find out what the core structure is. And it can be a very complicated process. Okay. So I cannot be the one to judge on a case-by-case basis. All I can do is give you what the parameters are in the Catholic Church. And because we have this confusion caused by the split that the Protestants made with us in the 1500s, okay, and even the Orthodox in 1054, and then not only that, but then we have the splits that occurred in the Protestant churches, and up until today, there are 45,000 different denominations. And they're each going to have different rules about marriage and divorce because they're each going to look at the Bible differently. Okay. And hardly any of them look at tradition because they don't like what tradition has to say. Why? Because tradition taught what I taught you tonight. Okay. They don't like that. They want to be able to get divorced and remarried. That's the issue. Who cares whether you can get divorced or not? The marriage that's in fornication is already divorced. It's already separated. They've caused a mental separation between husband and wife. The only next step is going to be where one of the spouses moves out and they don't bed together anymore. Okay. But basically, once you've committed fornication, you've separated the spouses, you've divorced them. It's not going to be the same unless it's repaired and brought back together. And that's not often. Okay. That's not often. That might be the ideal, but it's not often. Okay. So you have a lot of separated marriages out there, whether the husband and wife are bedded together or not. Okay. But you have all these problems that come up because now you have all the denominations making their own rules, and it's going to take some doing to undo it all and then put it all back together the way it should be. Okay. And that's the job of the tribunal, and I'm glad I don't serve on that. All right. Question: why is it hard for people to look at data and form an opinion instead of listening to experts' opinion? I.e., masks, evolution, etc. Well, John, that's life. You can, an expert is someone who is an authority on his area of expertise because he has studied his area for a accepted length of time, wherein he knows the basics and a few of the twists. He's going to find out there's a lot more twists in real life when he gets out there. But, like you want to be a doctor, you have to study these particular subjects for 4 years. Now, it doesn't mean that he knows everything that he's going to. I mean, my father was a doctor. I asked him on a percentage basis, how much does he really know about the human body? And he said about 2. Okay. Now, he tended to exaggerate sometimes, but, he could have said 10. It wouldn't be that much different from 2. But all his years of medical school didn't amount to all that he learned. That's why they call it medical practice, because you learn much more than you are going to learn in medical school. You just learn the basics. Okay. But you learn enough to get a degree called MD that you can put on a shingle outside your house, and people will come to you because we've accepted that he knows more than we do about our body. He may not know a whole lot, but he at least knows more than we do and can suggest to us what might be the proper way to take care of this medical problem. It may work or not work, but through his knowledge and experience, this is what we're going to do, and people accept that. So he's an expert. Lawyer, same thing. He goes to 3 years to law school and he learns a heck of a lot of stuff, but he's going to, you've heard the old expression, I want a good lawyer. Why is that? Well, because there's a lot of bad lawyers out there, okay, who don't know what they're doing. They can pass a bar exam, but they can't deal with real life. And so you're going to get that. So sometimes the experts can be wrong. But most of the time in society, we'll accept the opinion of the expert, at least as the first stage of dealing with the problem, because that's all we've got. Okay? You don't want somebody up there pretending to be a doctor who's really a quack and doesn't know a thing about medicine, and he's pretending to be a doctor. You don't want him operating on you, do you? No. You want the expert, the guy that's has at least some experience and at least some education to where he's going to put the knife in and start cutting. Okay? But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they botch surgeries. There's malpractice suits all over the place because doctors botch surgeries. And so, that's the nature of life. Priests are the same way. Popes are the same way. We got a pope in there now who, I'm not going to say anything right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay. We've had some popes in there who don't know what they're doing. And we've had some that are gosh, they are unbelievable what they have done for the church. So, that's what's going to happen in life. Question: what is the difference between Petrine and Pauline privilege? How would a Catholic acquire those privileges? Well, the Pauline privilege is when you are married to an unbeliever. Okay, so let's say you were both unbelievers, and then one of the spouses converted to Christianity. Okay, and that's going to cause friction. Depending on what the personality is of the other spouse, in normal life, they can be very patient and kind and loving, and it really doesn't matter whether their spouse has become a Christian, at least not enough where it's going to cause friction. But there are other spouses who that's the last thing they want to have to their spouse, that they become a Christian. And so they want out of the marriage. And so the question would be, does the Christian have the right to leave that marriage because the unbeliever doesn't want them to be living together and be married? And the answer would be yes. Okay. And so that's the privilege that the Christian has. In that privilege, okay, because this distinction between Catholic or Christian and non-Christian is so important, that privilege allows them to be married to another Christian. So if that Christian separates from the non-Christian, that marriage is dissolved, and it allows that Christian now to be married to a Christian, not to another non-Christian. Okay, the church would never sanction that, but to a Christian. Okay, that's the privilege that they have. And, that's what the church has taught us since time immemorial. It can be supported by an exegesis of 1 Corinthians 7, verses 12 and 13. And, that's what it is. All right. Question: I had a rough marriage. I sent you some of the details a while back. And she was the one who petitioned for the divorce back in April 2020. Can I still receive communion? Of course you can. No question there. Question: is it possible that a reason why the neocons in this country, as well as the secular Western powers, like to warmonger about Russia is because of the fact that they are Orthodox Christian? No, if I understand your question correctly. The reason the neocons like to make a boogeyman out of Russia is because most of them are evangelical, okay, or Zionist, one or the other, or both. Okay, so the way it works is, Russia's been down there in the Middle East, and they're all scared that Russia is going to fulfill the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and come and attack the Middle East, namely Russia. That's been the byword for, probably ever since Scofield came out with his Bible in the early 20th century. And basically, he names Russia as enemy number one that's going to attack Israel in the future. And so now they have to do everything they can to stop Russia, which is always curious to me, because if prophecy says Russia is going to attack the Middle East and Israel and overwhelm them, then why are they trying to stop it? So, aren't you playing the role of the devil there? Because if God says this is what I prophesy is going to happen, and that's the way you interpret it, Well, then why are you trying to thwart God's plan? Okay. But of course, that logic doesn't, it's got kind of reverse logic that they use. And so Russia becomes the boogeyman. And that's why all the, you get this, division between the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States. See, in the last 4 years, the Republicans were Trump Republicans. They weren't neocon Republicans like they were in the Bush administration. In the Bush administration, you had all the neocons who basically wanted to make Russia the boogeyman, just like Biden does right now. As a matter of fact, he just came out yesterday and said Russia was going to pay for meddling in our elections. He just has it totally backwards, of course. But this is the steam that they live off of. You see, this is how you make Russia the boogeyman. You accuse them of meddling in the elections. When we know what the true story is, we all know what the true story is. That China was behind it with Italy and Germany, and Brazil was involved. I mean, it was just a consortium of nations. Of course, that was all petered out, no matter what we said or what was said. They just put it all to rest and like it never happened and start pointing the finger at Russia again. Okay. This is what a neocon does, because the whole idea is that Russia is going to attack Israel, and neocons are Zionists, and they want to stop Russia. So that's where the finger is pointed. Okay. It's not pointed at China, even though China is much more diabolical today than Russia ever is. Russia has turned Christian, basically. And we could see that movement all the way from Gorbachev to Yeltsin to Putin. It's amazing how Russia's basically turned around 180 degrees from where it was back in 1917 under Stalin and Lenin. They were totally atheistic at that point. Now they're welcoming Christianity, and they're leading the world in a lot of moral categories above the West, if you look at the statistics. So marriage and divorce is one of them, as a matter of fact. So that's good to know. Okay, so no, the Orthodox Christians are for Russia. There's no mixture of neocons and Orthodox Christians in the United States. That's just something that's like mixing oil and water. All right. Question 3. Have you thought about teaching in the Collegium? No, I don't think they need me. So, and I have enough work to do on my own. So, and I'm getting too old for that stuff. All right. Question, doctor. My former husband lied and said he was a baptized Protestant. My bishop in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, gave him a pass with no proofs. We were married in the Catholic Church. Was that a valid marriage? Well, not if he's getting married under false pretenses. Okay, that's again, but you'd have to bring this to the tribunal. They'd have to see if that was a sufficient reason. When you couple that with all the other things that are required for a valid marriage, if that's the only outstanding thing, does that dissolve the marriage? Well, they have to be the judges of that. That's why we have tribunals, okay, for cases just like this. And they can get very complicated, where your head's spinning with all the possibilities that you could think of to adjudicate them. But it's the only one's going to be right. And they're the ones blessed by God to do it. And there's 3 of them. And then that has to be approved by the bishop. So, you're going to have to bring it to the tribunal and see if it's legit, if you want to pursue it. Okay. All right. Question. Lawrence says, where does the church teach that the priest marries the church? I don't know where that's taught, Lawrence. Where did you hear that? You know, that's the first thing I would track down, where you heard that from. I mean, in the colloquial sense, we might say that, but not canonically. But there's a big difference between those two perspectives. So, sorry, I can't answer your question. So Borkamp has a question. He says, possible on a planet with, I go, is it possible? Is that what you're trying to say? Is it possible on a planet with a rotation speed of 241 meters per second, or was that miles per second, at its equator, and an atmospheric volume less than 1% of Earth's? I don't know. What are you talking about? Now, I know, Mercury has no atmosphere. Venus has very thick atmosphere, so it's not 1% of Earth's. And Mars has very, very scant atmosphere, if any. Jupiter, very thick atmosphere. Saturn, very thick. Uranus, very thick. So I don't know what planet you're talking about here. And I don't know what the point is of your question to begin with. So you're going to have to be much clearer for me to help you here. Sean Marie says, my former husband said the church where he was baptized burnt down. No name of church, no proof. Well, see, the tribunal will take that into account. Okay. If there is no proof, here's what we do. Okay. They're not going to play a guessing game. They've been through this before, believe me, Sean Marie. They'll be able to figure it out. Okay. Borkamp says, are the laws of physics for rotating frames of reference the same as the ones for inertial frames of reference like Earth? Well, this is a very interesting question. Okay. Because my partner, Robert Bennett, says that the only place where the laws of physics can work correctly is in an inertial frame. And guess what? A non-moving Earth is an inertial frame. Okay. And so that's why physics is going to work here. F equals ma, or F equals gm1 m2 over r squared, whatever Newtonian things you want to use. They're all going to work here because we have an inertial frame. Anything outside the Earth is not an inertial frame, and therefore you're going to have different laws of physics. That's his claim. And I think he's right. Okay. And even Einstein admitted this. He when he invented special relativity, that was all based on an inertial frame. And yeah, of course, light's going to go the same speed in an inertial frame because there's nothing influencing it. Okay, but when you get into a non-inertial frame, well, then you have this other theory that he has to invent called general relativity, and that deals with non-inertial frames that have to put up with gravity and inertial forces and everything else, and the laws of physics are different. So different that Einstein said that in non-inertial frames, the speed of light is not constant. And that means if gravity and inertial forces are present, then the speed of light's not constant. Okay. And all things change basically in a non-inertial frame as opposed to an inertial frame. So now the thing about special relativity is, yeah, you can invent a theory that says light's going to be constant in an inertial frame, but where is that inertial frame? Do you know anywhere in the universe that the space is not affected by gravity or inertial forces? There is no such space. So this whole special theory is idealistic. It doesn't deal with reality. Okay, general relativity deals more with reality because it recognizes that light, gravity, whatever, magnetism, it's all going to be dealing with gravitational forces and inertial forces, which changes everything. Okay. So, yeah, I would definitely say yes to your question. Lauren says annulments have gone from like 50 in 1960 to 10,000 or whatever the number is now. Does that mean they were too strict before, too lax now? Who knows? They had a right to be strict before, if you want to use that term, because people knew what marriage was about. Okay, you were taught by your mother and father, by your church, that marriage was a commitment, an exchange of vows that would last for a lifetime. Okay, and no questions asked. I mean, to get a divorce in the Catholic Church in 1950, 40, 30, 20 was practically unheard of. You just stuck it out. You stuck it out, and eventually you worked out your problems, and you were able to live together in peace and harmony, and your kids did well. And, look, we just by that model, we were in the beginning of the United States in the 1600s, we were the smallest church in America. The Catholics were. Okay. As a matter of fact, by the way, we were the first ones to establish the first settlement in the United States. It was not Jamestown, Virginia. It was St. Augustine, Florida. Just put that in your little hat. I think it was 15. And I just went down there to visit St. Augustine and read all the history about that. We were the first ones here, but we were outnumbered. Okay. We had Protestants coming from a lot of different countries, and they settled the colonies. We found our way into Maryland and, had some good fortunes there. But then what? In our day, we now have 65 million going on 70 million Catholics. And the largest Protestant denomination has like 20 million, the Southern Baptists. And we have more Catholics today than the top 10 Protestant denominations put together. Okay. So just by that model, wherein we stuck it out in our marriages, we didn't get divorced, the first time some crisis hits, and we raised our kids and we had more than 2.7, more like 7, 8, 9. Well, look what that did. Now we have more people per capita in the United States than the top 10 Protestant denominations. Okay, just by that model. Can you imagine what would have happened if we actually went out and evangelized like the Protestants do? Jeez, we would have total domination over this country if we actually evangelized. So yeah, they may be more lax now, but I don't know if I would use that word. As I said, I would say that the frequency of annulments today is due largely to the uneducated Catholic, the uncatechized Catholic who doesn't know his Catholic faith like people were taught before in the early part of the 20th century and before that. Okay. There's been almost a total dearth of Catholic education and good Catholic education. And I'm talking about in our universities today, they're just getting liberal garbage left and right. It's not our Catholic faith. It's everything but our Catholic faith. They just have the rudiments, the accoutrements of the Catholic faith. You go to Mass and you receive the Eucharist and, and all this stuff, and they pretend they're Catholic, but they're being taught all kinds of liberal garbage out there that is totally anti-Catholic. And by the time your kid comes out of a Catholic university, he's lost his Catholic faith or near to it. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Okay. So this is the kind of milieu that we have for our Catholic youth today. That's what they're being taught about marriage. They're getting their education about marriage from the world, not from the church. Okay. So, yeah, when you get that kind of delinquency among your Catholic population, you're going to have to make some adjustments. And allowing some of these annulments to increase is the reason why, or is one way to make adjustments. So, as I said earlier. So, Doreen says those Catholics who are married while waiting for an annulment cannot receive communion, but someone who supports abortion and gay marriage can. Yeah, it's turned upside down. This is the kind of education that we're getting. Okay, so you can imagine what these people are thinking about marriage. Some of them don't have the slightest clue what marriage is about. They think they're going out on a date, a long-term date with somebody, for Pete's sake. And I mean, I don't mean to be so crass, but that's, if you wanted to be, critical, jokingly critical about it, that's one analogy you might use. If someone is baptized as an infant in the Catholic Church, actually Catholic at that point, or does one need to be confirmed to be a Catholic? No, you are a Catholic when you are baptized. Confirmation is a required sacrament of you. Usually that's held off, though, until you reach, puberty and, 13, 14 years old. Some prefer to receive it at around 7. Okay. But at least, and that's where they receive the Holy Communion. And so they have to have formed conscience. And that occurs at 7 years old, around 7. So that's been the age for allowing communion. Some feel that if you can allow communion, well, then why can't you allow confirmation? And that happens in the Eastern churches more than in the West. But sometimes you can make a request to your pastor to have your kid confirmed earlier, and depends on what they say. They can make exceptions, because the normal age is around 13, 14, 8th grade, around there. So, Sean Marie says his father said we didn't have our 5 children baptized. Well, the priority you need to concentrate now on, Sean Marie, is getting your children baptized if you haven't already. Okay, very, very important. And not only for the salvation's sake, but you're going to need those records as your kids get older. They need to get confirmed. Well, let's see your baptismal record. They need to receive Holy Communion. Well, let's see your baptismal record first. Even when you get married, they want to see your baptismal record. Okay, everything centers around your baptismal record. So make sure you got that, and know the church where it's stored, because you're going to have to refer back to that church every time you need your baptismal record. What are the grounds for an annulment? Basically, the basic ground is that you did not have full consciousness of the responsibilities of marriage when you took your vows. That would be a basic understanding. Okay. Now, there's a lot of things that revolve around that the tribunal will deal with, but that's the basic reason, is that the time you made your vows, what was your spiritual disposition? What was your mental disposition? And the way you get to that is you look at your past history prior to your marriage, prior to your vow exchange. You look at the friends and relatives that knew you at that time, and you give them an interview, and you ask them pertinent questions, and they take an oath to tell the truth. And so you get a picture of the candidate for marriage from the people that knew them. Okay. And then you talk to some people that know them now. because what they do now is a reflection of what they believed before. And then you shake this all together and you come out with a decision based on all the evidence that you have. Okay. All right. Was Jean Guiton a close friend of Paul VI, the only layman allowed to sit on the Vatican II? And if so, why was he the only one allowed? Yeah, they were close friends. I don't know that much more about them, other than that they were close friends. So I could not comment any further on that. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. I'm not wearing any green tonight. Shame on me, I know. My kids said, "Daddy, where's your green?" And everybody was pinching me all day long. And I said, "What's that all about?" So, well, if you don't wear green, we get to pinch you. So I got pinched all day today, several times. Anyway, question. A church near me holds a Medjugorje rosary night and prayer group. What are your thoughts on this and more generally the cults found within the church surrounding that? Garabandal, others, blah, blah. Stay away from them, Zachary, okay? Medjugorje is bad news, okay? Garabandal, there's a lot of doubts about it. I wouldn't totally throw it away yet. But Medjugorje, no. The expert on this that has done a lot of work is Michael Jones, Michael Jones. He has a book out on it. I suggest you contact him, www.culturewars.com, okay, and get his book on it. Somebody here is writing to me in Greek and Hebrew. Blades on T, Bon Me. Yeah, so I don't know. Looks like you're missing some letters here. Oh, and Russian. Looks like Russian. Anyway, let me move on. Or what they call Cyrillic or Cyrillic. Question, Mike here. How do you fit Pope Leo XIII's vision with current events? Was 100 years figurative? Are we just past it and reaping the fruits of it? The 100 years is over. It was a local, time-constrained prophecy, if it's true and if it's applicable. Okay. Then it would be in that time period. Whatever starting period you have for the 100 years, it ended a while ago. Okay. So that's how I would look at that. As I had said about all the Marian apparitions, they're all local, time-constrained apparitions dealing with issues of that day. Okay. And very few of them have extensions into the future. You could count them on one hand: Quito, Akita, and Fatima, and that's it. Okay, so that's how I would attack any of these, periods of time where something is supposed to happen during a period of time. Is it happen locally? All right, Jean-Marie, later in our 23-year relationship, we're still going on with Jean-Marie's marriage here. He did go through RCIA, confession and confirmation, Holy Communion, still having adulterous affairs. I left him, divorced him, no annulment, don't think I need one. Well, depends on what your needs are. In the church's eyes, you're still married to him. Okay. So you can be separated from him, but you're still married to him. An annulment would free you of him totally. And no illegal obligations whatsoever. Okay. I assume the children are all grown up, so there wouldn't be any problem there. But if there's any other legal issues hanging over you, that involve the church, then he's going to be counted in as long as he's married to you. Is the process of annulment infallible? No. The church does its best with, even, when we talk about saints, we used to have this thing called the devil's advocate. And you would think that if heaven is going to give their okay to saint someone by giving a number of miracles, and it used to be three legitimate miracles that were exonerated by the devil's advocate to be legitimate miracles, not things like, internal maladies suddenly being cured that they don't know the nature of the malady to begin with, let alone if it was really cured or not. We're talking about legitimate miracles, like people rising from the dead or limbs being put on people or all kinds of things that you could say, oh, that's a miracle. Okay. Well, we used to have the devil's advocate who would do his best to uncover all the dirt about somebody, but he may miss something. Okay. Or somebody may hide something from the devil's advocate because they favor the person. They don't want anything bad to get out. All kinds of things can happen. Okay. So the devil's advocate did his best with the information that he could uncover. Same with annulments. The judgment of someone's disposition at the exchange of marriage vows. How in the heck are you going to figure that out? You can't get inside the mind of the person and, make an infallible judgment like God can. You just take the evidence as it appears to you from witnesses, and you make your human judgment on that. That can be that could be fallible. Okay. Now the likelihood that that you will make a mistake is very remote, though. Okay. It may be 1 out of 1,000 times that you don't get the right information and you make a wrong decision. Okay. Look, we can live with those odds. Okay. It's not going to be 100% in this world. Nothing's going to be 100%. Okay. So yeah. So whether it's infallible, it really doesn't enter into the issue. Practically speaking, yeah, they're most of the time they're right and they do a good job. Okay, that's their job. All right. Lawrence. Who are those two that can exegete the scriptures on marriage? I don't know. I don't remember who they are, Lawrence, so I can't give you their names. Question. There was a story today of a German priest stating they will ignore the Vatican statement and will bless same-sex civil unions. Do you think the upcoming German synod could end in schism? Oh, yeah. Yeah. The Germans are always in the possibility of schism. They think they run the church. It's like Jesus saying, or was the guy he met? I forget what his name was. Anyway, they told him that Jesus came from was it Nazareth? And he said, "Can any good come out of Nazareth?" I feel the same way about Germany sometimes. It's like, can any good come out of Germany? I mean, the liberal movement of theology started in Germany with all the German theologians. And they just basically, they turned Europe into a shambles theologically. In the 1800s, 1900s, they were just, I don't know what it is about them. But they've always been trouble theologically, always. So, yeah, they could be headed to schism. This is something where the Vatican, I believe, has drawn their line in the sand, and anybody who crosses it's going to be in big trouble. And I don't think the money that the Germans give to the Vatican is going to matter in this case. I think the Vatican is going to suck it up, and they are going to come down hard on. Now, they may allow it to go on for a while, but if it gets any bigger, they're going to put their foot down, is what I predict. All right, question. In a course on the Gospels, I learned that Luke is the meek, poor man's gospel, while Matthew is for status, shepherds, and magi, the same people represented differently for a reader. Well, I think you would make more of an argument if you said Matthew is dealing with the Jewish people and Luke is dealing more with the Gentiles, or a Gentile looking at the Jews. And since Gentiles were more varied in their economic status, you could have rich, poor, and middle of the road. Luke has an appeal to the poor people in that sense because they're part of the larger group. Whereas Jews were not looked upon as poor people. I mean, they did have their poor people, but they were few and far between. Most Jews lived pretty well, and so in that sense, you could say Matthew was dealing with the upper crust of society in when he was dealing with the Jews, okay? And Luke was dealing with a much more general audience. So yeah, you could say he appealed to poor people. That's how I would approach it, okay? Not that Luke wrote exclusively for poor people, or that Matthew wrote exclusively for upper echelon people. But if you had to make a slight difference between the two, that's what I would say. Okay, so I'm looking for a question here. All right, so somebody's asking again, why were there less than 400 annulments before Vatican II and then many more? I already answered that question, I think twice now, so we'll have to move on. Ray says, Dr. Sungenis, why does Jesus Christ say in Matthew 19:9, except it be for fornication, if any remarriage, if she is still alive after the divorce, would constitute an adulterous marriage? Your question is a little confusing to me. What he's saying here is that if you divorce, let's just say this, if you divorce your wife, you've committed a sin. Okay? If you divorce your wife for fornication, you have not committed a sin. Okay? Because fornication is the one thing that allows you to divorce, to separate from your wife. As a matter of fact, when you commit fornication, you automatically separate the spouses. There is a mental, spiritual separation between the two spouses, whether you admit it or not. It's there. Okay? And from that, you have the right not to bed with that partner anymore. You leave the house, or you are in another part of the house or whatever, but you don't bed anymore together. And so let me say it again. If you divorce, you commit sin. If you divorce because your partner's committed fornication, you do not sin. Okay, but if you get remarried, you do sin. You commit adultery, and the person you marry commits adultery also. Okay, so that's the way I would answer the question. Question in Matthew 5:29-30, could this also be interpreted as Jesus telling the leaders of the church to cast out members that are living in unrepentant sin? No. Because that passage, if you look upon a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery in your heart. And I think you're saying that, we look at members of the church, if they've committed sin, they should be cast out. It's a whole other context. Jesus is not teaching about the church here. He's teaching about personal ethics, okay? Individuals, okay? How do you conduct yourself in this world? That's what Jesus is dealing with on the Sermon on the Mount. When you're talking about the church and how they should conduct dealing with sinners, unrepentant sinners, well, you've got 1 Corinthians chapter 5 as the paradigm for all of that. And then you have a couple of other chapters after that dealing with the same thing. So that's, where you're going to get the meat and potatoes of dealing with members of the church. Adrian says, I remarried outside of the church after annulment, but my current legal husband is not willing to get married in the church. I thought he was Catholic. He lied. We have kids. No sacraments for me. Wow. I feel sorry for you, Adrian. So he told you he was Catholic and he lied? Why? That is amazing. Well, listen, the only thing you can do right now, Adrian, is, despite his lying to you, you are married to him. And you made that decision for better, for worse, right? So now you have the worse. And you have to live with it. Okay? Especially for your kids. So you remain with him, love him as much as you can, and hopefully he's going to give you love back, and that's all you can go on. Okay? But I would see a priest about this. Local Catholic priest. Hopefully he's a good one. And see what he says about the fact that your husband's not allowing you to receive the sacraments. Because if he's a good priest, he's going to say, there is something we should do about that. We should have a talk with your husband. And it could be that if he does not allow you to receive the sacraments, you can divorce him. Okay? Or get an annulment from him. But I would pursue this if I were you. I mean, if he's lied to you, so he's put you in a, if he's in a dishonest situation, so we know kind of character we're dealing with, and then neither you nor your kids can get the sacraments, wow. Okay, you have cause to pursue this and to get a remedy for it from the church. Okay, and they will give you guidance. And my guess is that they are going to say you can pursue a divorce. We'll talk to them first, and we'll say, look, if you don't allow her and the kids to receive the sacraments, then we're going to tell her that she can divorce you or get an annulment from you, whether you like it or not. Okay, so first give him an ultimatum. And then if he still sticks to his guns, then go see the priest and tell him your situation. And if you don't get a good answer from him, go to some other priest. Okay, and I know you have your choice because, You're not in a parish right now, and that's sad, especially for your kids. So now that you've told me this, you have the responsibility to pursue it. Okay? This is not just one of those opinion matters. This is real life, because this is exactly what the church would tell you to do. Okay? And your life and your kids' lives are at stake here, not physically, but spiritually. And so go pursue it. And if you would, Adrian, I don't know what CFT means behind your name. But at any rate, if you would, after you pursue this, come back to us and let us know what happened. Okay? And I'm going to ask everybody on this board to pray for you, to give you the courage, the fortitude, the wisdom that you're going to need to deal with this, because this is a serious situation. We're all going to pray for you, and because of that, then you owe us an explanation in the future what our prayers did for you. So come back and tell us. But okay, this is what you need to do. All right. David says, in the Douay Reims, Old Testament, the word daughters is used in the place of towns or villages. Do you know why? You'll have to give me a verse there, David, so I can look at it. Sometimes, Hebrew allows you to mix nouns and pronouns, so that could be the reason, but I need to see the verse to know which one you're talking about. Question: What is your take on prelist? The Orthodox apply it to Catholic saints like Saint Francis of Assisi, basically being given visions and experiences by demons that led to pride and false humility. Alex, I have to be honest, I've never heard of that. So are you saying that the Orthodox, in order to demote St. Francis, says that he was given visions and experiences by demons? that exalted him to a false place of prestige? That's a new one. I've never heard that before. So, wow. That's an interesting one. If I remember, I'm going to have to look that one up. All right. A priest on Relevant Radio said, you can divorce if you find you're actually related. He said everyone else reads is okay. All right, hold on a second here. You can divorce if you find you're actually related. Yeah, that would be a cause. You could actually get an annulment. If you're related and you didn't know it and you got married, yeah, you can get an annulment. Like first cousins or something like that. He said everyone else is okay to divorce. You're confusing me. So I'm just going to take it point blank. If you're saying that a priest on Relevant Radio said it's okay to divorce for any reason, well, then this priest doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay? Now, I doubt he said that, because I don't know a priest in his right mind who would say that, knowing what Catholic doctrine is. Okay? So you're going to need to be a little clearer here, what you're saying, and try to make sure you don't miss any words, because if I miss a word, I may miss the whole meaning of your question. Okay? So be careful to put the right one, right sentence down. All right, question. What is your take on, okay, you already asked that one. What do you think the errors of Russia refers to specifically? Communism, Freemasonry, Darwinism, atheism, a mix of all four. And is there any connection to the Great Reset? No connection to the Great Reset. Yes, it does refer to all of the above. Mainly atheism. Okay. Because you can be a Freemason and still believe in God. You can be a Darwinist and still believe in God. A communist, you might be able to believe in God, but an atheist, you don't believe in God, and that's the big error. Okay. What if you commit a mortal sin, but you forget about it and don't go to confession because you believe you are in the state of grace, and then you die? Will that one forgotten sin send you to hell? Well, my friend, that's why God is the judge, not me. Okay. Obviously, it's wrong to have that mortal sin on your soul. You see, and what Catholics should do every once in a while is you go to the priest, you confess your present sins, and you say, for any sin that I have committed, mortal or venial, in the past that I have forgotten about, please give me absolution for that as well. And the priest will agree with you and give you absolution for any sin in the past that you may have forgotten about, and give you absolution for it so you can be put in a state of grace. Okay? So that's one thing that you remember to do in confession. Okay, so you don't get into situations. So if I were you, first opportunity I got, I would go to confession and tell the priest exactly what I just told you. I think, or I know I committed a sin in the past. I didn't ask forgiveness. Please give me absolution and put me in the state of grace, and he will. Okay? I've been divorced since 1986 and also received an annulment in the same year, but I still believe in one marriage and one wife and will remain divorced. Well, that's certainly your prerogative, Thomas. The church does not require that of you, but if that's the way you feel, I'm sure God will honor that. Amos says, when Jesus said, except for fornication, does this not mean if you or your wife commits adultery, then divorce is valid? Well, yeah, it does mean that. Okay. So in other words, if, as I just said to the other person, if you divorce, you've committed a sin. But if you've divorced your spouse because she committed fornication, then you have not sinned. Okay. So that's why you have the exception clause there. But what I'm trying to also say is the exception clause is not used also for remarriage. In other words, it doesn't do double duty. It only does single duty. It only allows you to divorce your wife. That is fornication. It allows you to divorce your wife. It does not allow you to remarry. Okay. And if you do remarry, even if you've been divorced for fornication, you've committed adultery. Okay. So that's what we mean to say. That's the Catholic doctrine. All right. Question. Fatima mentions that many marriages are not pleasing to God. How can one know that the person they want to marry will be pleasing to God and that it is God that has brought the two together? Well, you've brought yourself together, okay? And you are asking God to bless that joining of you two, okay? That's what's happening there. Pleasing is when you are in a state of grace. That's what it means to be pleasing to God. That occurs after you confess your sins, you take the sacraments as required by the church, and you remain in the state of grace. That's how you're pleasing. There's no other, way that you're pleasing to God. Okay. Mortal sin is only when one is fully aware of the sin and acts willingly. Therefore, someone who marries someone who has been divorced but is not aware of the conditions is not guilty. Am I wrong? Well, no, you're not guilty. But you see, these things, there are sins of sins where we sin deliberately and sins where we don't sin deliberately, but we still sin. And they are treated two different ways. Okay. So you can do a sinful act without knowing that it's really a sinful act or maybe a serious sinful act, but you're still sinning. Okay. And so you're not completely guiltless. But then if you go commit the same sin and you do it deliberately and you know what you're doing, yeah, well, then you have a totally different situation. Okay. And that's required of mortal sin. Otherwise, it's on the venial skins scale. Okay. But you still have to deal with it as a venial sin. All right. And the church has remedies for that. She has remedies for the mortal sin and the venial sin. So, yeah, but you're on the right track there. What if the tribunal were all liberals? Well, then we have the possibility that we might get a liberal answer from them. What, don't you think? Even liberals, though, they're not so keen on giving a lot of freedom in marriage and divorce, and they have to follow the church rules. Okay, they can skirt around the issues on a lot of theological things, but when it comes down to canonical law on marriage and divorce, there's not a lot of wiggle room, and they have to be approved by the bishop. So yeah, and they don't want their parishes divorcing willy-nilly. They want to keep things stable, so they have every incentive to do the right thing, to keep people together, to try to work out problems and give the annulments when they're absolutely necessary and withhold them when they're not, because they want stability. They don't want to get a reputation for being, wet noodles when it comes to standing up for the laws of marriage and divorce. Okay, so they have a lot of incentive to do the right thing, even though they may be liberal. Okay, all right. Absolutely brilliant, Martin says. I only wish you taught in seminary. Your explanation would have saved me hours and hours in the library, and I still never got it. This was not only intellectually enriching, but will directly help my ministry. So will directly help our brothers and sisters. I burnt my supper as I didn't want to leave in case I missed anything. It was well worth it. Thank you. Martin, thank you so much. You made my day. And sorry I burnt your supper. That's good. I'm so glad I helped you. And Adrian, I'm especially uplifted by the fact that you contacted us and told us your truth, and we're able to help you. So this is the moment of truth for Adrian. So Martin, Mr. Martin Wheaton, please pray for Adrian. Okay, that's going to be my fee to you. My fee for all the help that I've given you tonight is to pray for Adrian, and I don't mean just once. I mean continually. Can you do that for me, Martin? Okay, because this lady is in a fix, and we want her to make sure she gets her children to the sacraments and herself, and deal with this guy, and have her be prepared for whatever comes. So do that for me, okay, Martin? Martin is fishing for a discount code. Is that the truth, or how do you know that, Martin? I mean, Lawrence. Well, hopefully Martin's done his dinner. He can come back and give me an answer. All right. Where are we here? Uh, Okay. KPN 5000 says, didn't think divorce was a thing in Catholicism. Pretty sure it's not. It is. Fornication occurs between two unmarried individuals, I thought. Well, no, fornication can occur among anybody. Okay. Um, let's say that you have husband and wife, and the husband's looking at pornography. That's fornication. Okay. Pornea. Um, it's the general category of fornication. Okay. And now, but let's say that he, advances from the Playboy magazine and goes and actually has intercourse with another person, a woman or man, who knows these days. Um, um, that's not only fornication, that's the act of fornication, but now he has committed adultery. Okay, because a third party is now involved. And because of that, he's adulterated his marriage. Okay. So fornication is the act, adultery is the label that is put on you after you commit fornication with a third party. Okay. All right. So looking for a question. Okay, question. I read that you deny the Holocaust, or at least the number of Jews that were killed. Is this true? If so, why did you feel compelled to write about it? I don't know if I've ever written about it. Where did I write about it? I know I've read the books on it. Okay. And I do know there's a lot of discussion about this issue. When I was into this, how many years ago was that? I don't know, probably 10 to 15 years ago. I don't deal with it anymore because I have too many other things that I have to deal with. But yeah, I did question it. And the reason being was there were things that were sticking out that nobody was answering for me. One was the fact that the population, the Jewish population, had not decreased by 6 million people in Europe or around the world. And as a matter of fact, it hasn't really increased or decreased much in the last century. We still have, 14 million Jews around the world. 6 million of them live in the United States. That number just does not go up. Okay. So, and it doesn't go down either. It just stays right around 12, 13, 14 million. So, very small portion of the world. But when you look at the population statistics, say from 1948, and compare them with what, say, 1939, when the war started, there's really no difference in the population of Jews. So, where did these 6 million people go if there were 6 million? Okay. So, that was one thing. Another thing was the Red Cross. The Red Cross would go into the concentration camps weekly or daily, and they would keep records of the people that were incarcerated there. And their records don't come anywhere close to 6 million people. Now, the Red Cross is an honest organization, as far as I know. And I've seen their records. I've seen the actual records when I was doing my research on this. So, where else are you going to get these numbers? You're getting it from a third party who has no bias either way. And they're keeping records, and they're in the 100,000s, not in the millions. So that was another source. And then there was another source. This 6 million figure had been floated around ever since the New York Times wrote articles on the oppression of the Jews in Europe from the late 1800s through the 1910s and 20s, they were using this 6 million figure already, long before World War II ever came about. 20, 30, 40 years before. There was something about this figure 6 million that was that was popular among the Jews, that it kept being used in old newspapers. And I've seen the old newspapers, and I've seen them from the 1800s and the 1920s. So yeah, I mean, it was, and then there were some magazines as simple as Reader's Digest were floating this 6 million figure without any verification of it. And they were also showing that the population had not changed among the Jews before World War II as compared to after World War II. So, I looked at all that and I go, you know what? There's a question here. And this needs to be investigated. Now, for some reason, the Jews don't like us investigating it. Because that 6 million figure is sacred to them. I understand where they're coming from, but that doesn't mean that people can't go and do investigation and find out, is this a true figure? Because we want the truth. We don't want some made up imaginary thing because it's sacred to somebody. That can only go so far. But of course, if you do this, if you do some investigation on it, then, you're a Holocaust denier, which is, to me, that accusation is absurd to begin with. Who has to believe in the Holocaust in order to be a legitimate human being or be, accepted? We can deny all kinds of things that we don't like or have an opinion of that are adverse to other people. But, this is the kind of society we live in today, where you have to have PC language, and one of them is that you can't be, investigating whether there were 6 million people died in the so-called Holocaust. Okay. But, that's as far as I took it. There was other evidence. I don't even remember now. I've got, about 6 books on the subject written by qualified people when I was studying at that time. But that was 10, 15 years ago. I don't go into it anymore. And I really don't have an interest in it anymore. So, I let it go by the wayside. All right. Question. Legal husband implied he was Catholic. We got married outside of the church. I was pregnant. He was willing to annul his previous marriages so ours can be blessed. Now he refuses. Am I stuck? Well, you're not stuck. You need to go see a priest, Adrian. Okay. If you're Catholic, you need to go see a priest. And it looks like there's a lot more details to this than you can even put on this board. And since that's the case, put them all together, write them all down, and make them easily understood, and bring it to someone in authority in the Catholic Church. Okay. And I would do it sooner than later. Excuse me. Ground for invalid sacrament is deficit in form, matter, minister, or intention, right? Yes. Okay, but marriages and things like that can get very complicated. So that's why you need a tribunal to figure it all out. Or are you just talking about the sacraments here? I'm not sure where you're going with this, Lawrence. Lawrence 2, Robert 0. How will he do on question 3? Are you ready to rumble? We'll sell you the whole seat, but you'll need only the edge. Somebody's making a joke about something. Some translate fornication as incest. Well, they would be wrong. Okay, incest is one form of fornication, at least in the Greek understanding of the word porneia. Okay, it would include incest. It would include, homosexuality, lesbianism. It would include pornography. It would include sexual intercourse between two consenting adults, male and female. I can't accept the annulment process. They're giving away annulments like candy, unfortunately. Well, I don't know if I'd make that judgment so quickly, Tatiana. Have you ever been inside a tribunal, Catholic tribunal, dealing with an annulment? If you haven't, I don't think you have a lot of room to speak. Okay. It's a very serious thing, and there are a lot of very wrong things that happen to people. And without the tribunal and the possibility of an annulment, people would be out in the lurch and would not be able to have any remedies dealing with some very serious problems. Okay. So annulments are good. They are good. And they are to be given for valid reasons. Now, anything can be abused. Annulments can be abused. Okay. Marriages can be abused. All right. Anything can be abused. But it doesn't mean we put a dark face on the whole thing because we have some abuse. I think you know that. All right. So be careful how you say it. Question. Hello. Sorry, on a break at work. Is a heterosexual de facto relationship considered a marriage, or is a marriage that has to have vows with witnesses and being married by a priest? Yes, the latter. There is no de facto relationship. Okay. There may be in civil cases, where they say if you've lived with someone for 7 years, you're considered married in the civil court, but certainly not in the Catholic court. Okay. Yeah, you have to have exchange of vows, witnesses with a priest. You both have to be validly married. No, you can't have any baggage where previous marriages are still alive, and all that kind of stuff. They have to check that out thoroughly before they allow you to get married. Then and only then can you have a legitimate marriage, once all that is checked out. The exception is on the divorce, not the remarriage. That's correct, Tatiana. Question. When I have gone to confession, I was told that all of my past sins were forgiven. So those that I honestly didn't remember from years ago are forgiven, right? Well, yes. But that was a general absolution. Okay. And general absolutions are good unless you individually remember that you individually didn't confess a mortal sin. Okay. I would not advise you to assume that that sin is automatically forgiven. Because that's not the purpose of a general absolution. General absolution, like if you're on an airplane, it's going down and the priest is on board, he gives everybody general absolution. Yeah, okay, in those emergency cases, that can happen. But if you remember a mortal sin, go tell it to the priest and say, even though you said I was absolved, of all past sins, I feel the compulsion to confess this sin because it was a mortal sin, and I remember it vividly now. And please absolve. And I think he will absolve you of that. Okay, he doesn't want to take any chances either. So that's what I would suggest for you. It's certainly not going to hurt for you to do that. Tatiana says, God forgives us free will. We choose a spouse, and God honors our decision to marry them. That's correct. Has the teaching about marriage? No. Church has not changed their teaching on marriage. First Chronicles 7:29 uses daughters for villages. Do you know why? Oh, let me take a look. First Chronicles 7:29. Is that in the Old Testament? First Chronicles 7:29. Along the borders of Manasseh were Bethshan, Tanakh, Megiddo, and Dor, together with their villages. The descendants of Joseph, son of Israel, lived in these towns. Oh, well, so what are you saying? The Dure Reims uses, because this version here doesn't use it, uses villages. It would use daughters in the sense that they were descendants. Okay, that's probably why they were using daughters, if it's the Due Reims that was using that. All right. Has the church changed her teaching on marriage? No, and that'll never happen. It's always been the same for 2,000 years. Tatiana says, my Catholic priest said they are giving away annulments. Okay. Well, maybe he's in a situation where he sees that more clearly. There are some dioceses that give annulments away, twice or three times as many as some other dioceses. Depends on what kind of bishop you have there. Okay. So he may be in a place where that really does happen. You were joking. Oh, okay. Thank you. Pre-lust is a spiritual delusion that gives one feelings of specialness or chosenness. So Mormonism, Islam, all visions were from demons, and Orthodox extend this to post-schism Catholic saints. Leave it to the Orthodox, I'll tell you. No, come on. St. Francis of Assisi, give me a break. I admit that St. Francis had some flights of fancy, you might say. I mean, taking his clothes off in front of the whole city and proclaiming that, he wants to follow God, and as a lesson to his father, who was a rich man and wanted to stay rich and didn't want anything to do with Christianity. Yeah, you might say St. Francis had some weird ideas, but demon possessed? I mean, come on. The Orthodox have a tendency to do that. I mean, anything time they can stab a Catholic saint, they do it. So be careful of that. Martin, you're a priest? Well, great. He says he's going to say a mass for Adriana. Love that name, Adriana. Oh, that's great, Father Martin. Thank you so much. Question, isn't fornication idolatry? Well, it can become idolatry, yeah. As a matter of fact, idolatry is from sins like fornication. That's what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. So there's an association, but you do have to make the proper distinctions. Okay. I'm getting very tired here. It is 10:25. I'm almost to the end, so that's why I'm sticking it out here. Some of my Protestant friends were horrified when they found out I had to pay for an annulment. Look, every laborer, Jesus said, is worthy of his pay. St. Paul said the same thing. So tell them you're following the Bible, your Protestant friends, by giving money to those that give you an annulment, because they're the only ones that can do it. All right? And they've done their work, so you're going to pay them for what they did. And they're worthy of it. So tell them that's right from the Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, in case you need to proof text them. Thank you. I work in a tribunal, and we consider each case carefully and thoroughly. Well, thank you, Father Adam, I assume, or whatever your station is there. I go to church but do not receive communion because of my state. If I stayed chaste, confessed, and my sins would be okay to receive communion. Yeah. Why would they not? I'm just trying to figure out if there's more to your story than you're saying here. Or do I need to get a divorce from my husband? I go to church, but what is your state? That's what I'm confused about here, Mary. Your husband has nothing to do with whether you receive the sacraments or not. So that's why I'm confused here. Unless he's telling you you can't receive the sacraments, which you're not saying. So you're free to receive the sacraments. And yes, stay chaste. Are you saying that you are with your husband in a non-legal way, non-canonical way? Is that what you're saying? So there's more to your story here, so I really can't make a wise judgment for you, okay? You're going to have to give me some more information. Without going into a great deal of detail, I grew up in a house where I did not learn what a relationship meant or what love was. 2 annulments. My husband left us after nearly 20 years. My third husband. All right, well, there you go. Proof in the pudding, as they say. You need to know what a human relationship is, especially with something as intimate as marriage, before, and that's the church's job. Church's job is to make sure this couple that's come before them knows what they're getting into, and that this is a lifelong commitment. For better, for worse, for richer, for poor, for sickness and in health, blah, 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 blah. And that's not just a rehearsed formula that we speak at the altar, that we need to go through. What does it mean for better, for worse? Let me explain it to you. For worse, let me give you a couple examples. For worse, your wife becomes a quadriplegic. There's one instance. Okay. Let's just add examples to that. For richer, for poor. Let's say you get swindled by somebody and you lose every cent you've had. Or let's say your house burns down. Okay. You add examples to that. Okay. That's what marriage is all about. You got to be prepared for those things. Okay. And if you're not prepared to have your wife or your husband become a quadriplegic because they got into a car accident, then don't bother getting married, because you won't last. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to become a quadriplegic, okay? The odds of that happening are very remote. But that's the way you should think of your marriage. Okay? All right. Like Jesus said, marriage isn't made for everybody. It's only made for those who can stick by the rules of marriage. Okay? So when the apostles came to him and said, well, Jesus, if it's like this between a man and a woman, is it worth getting married? Well, Jesus says, well, it's only worth it for those that can obey the rules of marriage. If you can't obey the rules, then don't get married. Okay? People go into marriage today with this romantic idea, not that there's something wrong with romance, okay? Because we need romance. But that's all they think about, is this romantic idea of living in la la land, Man, that's as far away from reality as you can be. When you get down to the brass tacks of day in and day out life as a married couple. Yeah. Okay. That's what they need to be taught. We need to scare the hell out of them, to be very honest with you. And if they can pass that test, then they're on their way to knowing what marriage is all about. Okay. All right. Yeah, Lawrence, I'm going to put you in charge of giving Father Martin a discount. My husband was drinking and gambling, and I'm pretty sure cheating after I got sick halfway through our marriage. Then he was lying and stealing. He refuses to speak to me or my son. Well, this is for better or for worse, isn't it, Lulu? It's exactly what I was talking about. And if you don't think that could happen to you, I'm not talking to you, Lulu, now. I'm talking to other people on this list. Or if you don't think that can happen to you, what's happened to Lulu, you're living in a dream world. Okay? And things even worse than that. Yeah, that can happen. I received an annulment in 1980. They did a very in-depth investigation. I was very grateful. Okay, so even in 1980, yeah. When it comes down to a tribunal, I'm telling you, they take it very seriously. They take marriage and divorce very seriously. All right. There you go, Father Martin. There's a question for you from Lawrence. Where does the church teach that you're married to the church? I think it's just an analogy, a way of speaking, not literally anything. Okay. Well, see what Father Martin comes up with. Lulu continues, says, by the way, our son is schizophrenic and an adult. I have not dated anyone, have not gone out with anybody, just wondering what I should do in considering annulling the marriage under the circumstances. Well, there are such things as abandonment, okay, that the church will entertain as a reason for an annulment, okay? Because if he's not fulfilling the duties of a marriage, which is first, number one, having children, and taking care of providing for his wife, if you can prove a case of abandonment, okay, you might have something to go on there. Okay, so you would want to see your priest and see what is all involved in that, because it can get very complicated, but that's where you would want to start. Okay. All right. Got to the end. I can't believe it. It took me 2.5 hours, and I did it. Okay. I deserve a reward. Lawrence, what do you got for me? Anything? All right, so we are at the end of our program. Normally, we cut off at 9:30. I cut off at 10:30 today. Trying to answer everybody's questions. I have not gotten to your email questions, people, so I'm sorry. I'm still way behind. And I haven't even gotten to yesterday's questions I didn't get to yesterday. So even though I think I'm doing good, I'm not doing so good, am I? At any rate, we'll see you next week, and that will be March the 23rd, Tuesday will be our next day. I don't know what our topics will be. At that point in time, but I'll have them ready for you next week. But let's see what happens next week. Who knows what's going to happen next week that we'll need to talk about. But thank you for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. On your way out, go visit robertsandjanice.org there. And if you can, leave a little donation for me. We have a big donation button right on the home page. And we've got a lot of new materials, books and DVDs and all kinds of good things. So make a pit stop there and do us a favor. and let us know how you love the program and all the other things we do. Okay, see you next week.